We have a clinician today at Dental XP who's one of my favorite people, period. Jack Turbyville started off as I did a long time ago. We've been both practicing over 50 years. We're still at it. And one of the things that I think from a standpoint of people watching us, I would say I hope you have as successful and enjoyable career as both Jack and I have. Jack happens to be one of the foremost clinicians in the world, but as far as full denture, he is the foremost clinician in the world. No one does dentures the way Jack does. He's built up a reputation that started from one of both our heroes, Earl Pound. And we go back to the founding of the Academy of Aesthetic Dentistry. Charlie Pekas and I co-founded it and brought together the key people in the world in different specialties. Earl Pound was one of those people, and Jack was one of the founders as well. But Jack has studied with Earl, and I'm going to let him tell you more about it, but I'll tell you something. It's really my privilege to introduce him, and it's our privilege here at Dental XP to have you, Jack, because
Thank you.
we think you're the best. We know you're the best.
And that puts me under a lot of stress. Yeah, Ron, I graduated from dental school in 1959, and I was a pretty good student. And so I got out and I started doing general dentistry. Every time I'd do a denture, some of them would be right and some of them didn't work out. And I did them all the same. And so 1963, I had a patient that I made a denture for her. She brought me a picture of herself. She had a congenitally missing lateral, and the other lateral was a peg lateral, and I made that denture look just like her. She turned down every aspect of that denture. She didn't like it. And so I ended up doing what most dentists have done at least once in their life, many times. I refunded the patient's money, and I swore never to do another denture in 1963. So in 1961, I had the opportunity to sit in on a 3-day CE course with Clyde Schuyler. You know Dr. Schuyler?
One of the best.
He was the S in the Panky
Yes.
and Schuyler. And so in 1964, I started going down and listening to Dr. Panky. And in 1965, I started going down to hear Pete Dawson. In 1970, I met Earl Pound. Well, Earl needed a boy. His study club out there in California, I still got a picture of him, old Carl Reeder. He wasn't old then. He looked to be about 19 then. But they had disbanded, and Earl needed a boy. And I became Earl's boy. And I didn't want to do dentures. You know, I wanted to be a real dentist, like Dr. Payne and Dr. Dawson. But Earl was such an interesting person. One time I was out there visiting, and he took me to Charlie Stewart's house. Charlie Stewart's birthday parties. Earl graduated 1 year before Charlie Stewart from dental school, and Earl taught on the clinic floor at Southern Cal. And Earl got up and made a toast to Charlie, and he said, "It just makes me feel so good to see some of my students do so well in dentistry." And so as the years went by, as Earl got older, and I started going, I bet I went for 5 or 6 years, 2 or 3 times a year to Case Western and help him teach those hands-on. And then when Earl died in 1990, in fact, I was elected to him and me. And I went out with Alvin Philastra, bless his heart, he's gone too. And I got back into my room, and the phone, the red on the phone, that always scares you when you're out of town, that red light's going. So I called up, and it was Dr. Pound's wife called and said that Earl was on his last leg. And so the hotel down, the Marriott Hotel down in Atlanta, they took me out to the airport. My staff took my car back to Columbia, and I went out there. And sometimes when I tell this, I get a little bit choked up, so I try not to. But one of the last things Earl told me was, "Jack, don't let our baby die. We've got something the profession needs." And Earl died very disappointed because no dental school in the world was teaching any of his techniques.
I don't want to steal your thunder because you're going to be teaching and giving some excellent courses here with us.
Okay.
But I just want to tell you what a pleasure it is to have you here and to talk with you. And the audience is privileged, because it goes all over the world, to see one of the greats in dentistry, period. I hope you'll enjoy it. And for me, Ron Goldstein, this is the best there is. Thanks so much, and we look forward now to the courses.
Thank you for the privilege. Thank you. It's an honor. It's an honor. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Tyler for helping me out so much, and thank Ron and Dental XP for their interest in showing some of the problems that dentistry has with removable prosthodontics. Removable prosthodontics is probably the most lucrative field in dentistry today, I feel like, because the senior citizens in this country are the fastest growing group. They also control more money than any group of people in the history of the world. And as the years go by, expected lifespan is going up. And I've been told that one of these days, 90 to 95 will just be the typical lifespan of a senior citizen. And I don't think with all this refined carbohydrates that we have in our diets today that dentistry is going to be able to keep teeth in people's mouth that long. So I think that removable pros is the most lucrative field in dentistry today. So we're going to talk basically today about dentures. And I have this feeling that complete dentures is really a dying art. I know I've heard of instances where dental students graduate from dental school and never have done a denture. And one of the reasons is that these fast denture mills have set up all over the country, and a patient can go in there and for a cheap price they can get a denture made in 1 hour, one day. And people go and set these denture mills up in the shadow of the dental school, so I think the dental schools are having problems with getting edentulous patients for the students to do their work on. However, the statistics that I have been seeing is that right now there are approximately 35 million people in this country that are totally edentulous. 15 to 20% of that 35 million have new dentures made approximately every 2 years. I also saw in the statistics that it's estimated that 80% of all the dentures being worn out there are deficient in some way. So let's start and kind of show you what we're going to do to treat the edentulous patient. So there's some things that dentures should have. First of all, they have to be comfortable. The patient's not going to wear them if they hurt. The next thing is they have to be aesthetic. And then we want the patient to be able to function normally with their dentures. There's one thing more that I have added to it, and I've added predictability. And I'll go into that just a little bit more. Now, the comfortable, aesthetic, and functional requirements of denture, is different for every patient. There are some patients that they don't care what they feel like and how they work, just so they look good in their mouth. Other patients will come in, and I've had patients come in and tell me, well, look, just so they're comfortable and I can eat anything I want to, I don't care what they look like. Well, you better be careful with a patient like that, because once they find out that I can make them comfortable and I can make them functional, sometimes these people become aesthetic nightmares, you see. So let's see how we do this. The first order of business is let's make these dentures aesthetic. And the aesthetics has to do with the position of the upper anterior six incisors. And I'm going to show you how we go about doing that. And getting the 6 anterior incisors in a natural position is something I like to do with function. For instance, you've all heard about the denture look, and I've heard teachers in removable pros talk about placing the teeth over the crest of the ridge or close to the crest of the ridge. That gives them more stability. In fact, that gives them less stability, especially in a class 1 situation. If you have the teeth set back over the ridge and you've got a tight class 1 occlusion, how are you going to keep the lower anterior teeth from a restricted envelope of function on the lingual of the upper teeth and dislodging the denture? So we'll show you in just a few minutes how we go about starting the aesthetics. The next thing is comfort. Now, my approach to complete denture is way different from anything that's taught in our dental school. And these are functional impressions. These are created by the patient as they wear them. This is one of the reasons that over the years, we only have about 1 patient out of every 5 that requires a post-insertion adjustment. And we'll show you how these functional impressions are made. So that's the comfort part. Now the function part has to do with the aesthetics. With the function. And what we use is a central bearing point. A central bearing point recording is the most predictable way of recording centric relation. And of all the things we do in dentures, recording centric relation is the most important thing. Now, there's so much to talk about when we talk about denture occlusion and centric relation. You take a denture patient that has been functioning with a denture that's built out of centric relation for many years. And the muscles in their brains have taught them how to eat with that denture. And if you think you're going to get those condyles working in centric relation by taking a 15-minute wax bite, you're not going to do it. And many, many times it takes several months to get the patient operating in centric relation. And of course, there will be a lot more about the occlusion a little bit later. Now, look at using occlusal indicator wax and having a patient close on their back teeth and giving a little squeeze. Look at the occlusion. It is absolutely imperative that you have an equal contact of all the teeth as that patient closes into centric relation. And I feel like that in complete denture work, that a dentist can get everything in that denture wrong. He can miss vertical dimension. He can have the teeth not in a very aesthetic position. But if he gets the occlusion dead on, he's probably going to have a successful denture. On the other hand, if you get a dentist that gets the aesthetics absolutely Hollywood perfect and the vertical perfect and the perfect functional impressions, and yet he misses the occlusion, he's going to have a failure for sure. So here is our patient, comes in with a very unaesthetic denture, and the patient leaves with an aesthetic denture. And here are this particular patient's functional impressions, and I can tell you this patient was delivered, the denture was delivered. We never did a post-insertion adjustment. So here's where the predictability part comes in. We just didn't make that denture from a straight where we made impressions, we did a jaw relation, we set teeth, we did a try-in, process the dentures. Nope, we don't do that. Because the patient wears a training temporary denture before the final denture is processed. In the lower part of the screen, you will see our training denture. We call these temporary dentures, we call them diagnostic dentures, we call them training wheels. And the patient will wear this until we have satisfied all their problems. And many times as they wear these things, we end up having to do remounts, working on the occlusion more. We sometimes end up moving teeth around for the patient. And but some people in 2 post-insertion adjustments of these provisional temporary dentures, the patient's ready to go. Now you notice that temporary denture doesn't have any lower posterior teeth. Now that is we call it a chewing block, and it doesn't really have an maximum inner cusp position. Those upper lingual cusps are actually functioning on a non-interfering, free-running bite block. That actually works on a denture like a superior repositioning splint would work in natural teeth. And it will allow the muscles to relax, allow these condyles to go to their most seated position. So, another thing that we do, because we feel like it's our obligation to our patient, as that patient is wearing that treatment denture, we stop and give the patient all of their options. The patient is doing pretty well with the treatment denture, and so we tell the patient, well, we can go ahead and finalize your denture. However, would you think you might be interested in maybe some implants? Well, if they are, then all we do is take that treatment denture, send them to the imaging center, and that's a couple of miles from our office, and they will do a 3D scan and return the information on a DVD to us. Now, I have had people tell me that you have to have a all-plastic denture to use as a radiographic guide for 3-dimensional scans. However, I want to tell you that the material that we use, the functional material that we use inside these dentures, is nothing more than a soft acrylic. And this material shows up the same on a 3-dimensional CAT scan as regular processed acrylic. Now, the beautiful thing about the treatment denture is that if that patient decides on implants, you know where the patient's problems are coming from. You notice there's a dentist placing a wedding ring on a female finger, and the caption says, "With this implant I thee wed till death do us part." And you notice the wedding ring has an implant stopped on the side, because it's very, very important before you start putting implants in that, first of all, we know by the use of the treatment denture, and the patient has to approve the treatment denture, the dentist has to approve it, we have to make sure that the occlusion is just right, and then if they're interested in implants, we know exactly where the patient's teeth belong, we know exactly where the bone is after we have the scan done, and the most important thing is we know exactly where the patient's problems are coming from. Now, I try to be a little funny sometimes, and I say denture problems come from 2 areas in the patient's head. The problems that come from the nose down are generally very easy to solve. The problems that occur from the nose up is sometimes impossible. So it's very important to know what kind of a patient that you're dealing with. Now, I know that denture patients, there are a lot of dentists that don't like dentures. And I hear dentists all the time. I'll say something about dentures to a dentist, and I'll get I hate dentures. Okay, you know why they hate dentures? Because they're not predictable. Because, and there may be a lot of people that would not like what I'm fixing to say, and that's putting it mildly. But for 100 years, our dental schools have been teaching dentists to go directly from the wax-up try-in to the final product. This doesn't make much sense to me, because the most unpredictable service that any dentist provides for a patient is complete dentures. And we go from try-in to finished dentures. You never know. The patient is always in control. The patient is always in control. I finished a denture one time in 1963, and I had worked so hard on that denture, and that patient rejected everything about that denture. And she loved the try-in. She even claimed that that was not the same denture that she saw at try-in. That was 1963. I quit doing dentures. I didn't do another denture until 1970 when I met Dr. Earl Pound. So even if you do two central incisor, maxillary central incisors veneers, you do the preps and you put some temporaries on there. And the patient calls the next day and I say, I hate these two teeth that you put in there. Well, you solve the problems in the temporaries before you go to the final prosthesis. And in denture work, we go directly from wax up to try-in. There's no way to solve that patient's problem before you finish. Now, so the first thing we have to do when we start working with dentures is to decide where the upper anterior teeth go. Now, Dr. Pound, he would only put two central incisors in there. I always think it's a little bit more difficult to get a sense of the overall aesthetics on this case without all six of them, but basically all you need is two. Now, if you think about a full mouth reconstruction, and you're going to have to change incisal edge positions, and you're going to have to put new tops on teeth, and it's all going to be with fixed prosthesis in a patient in a full mouth reconstruction of natural teeth. The first thing that we do on a denture, decide where the upper incisal edges go. That's the first thing you're going to do on the full mouth reconstruction. And so Dr. Pound, he used to take and put a base plate with a wax rim, and he'd soften the wax in the front, and he would stand back, and he would stick a front tooth in there, and then he would stick another central in there, and he'd move and look again. He'd move them and fiddle around with them for a while. And I would say, Dr. Pound, how did you know where to put those two central incisors? He would always say, well, Buddy Rowe said, after you've done it as long as I've done it, you kind of know where they go. So many years ago, I started looking to see if I could find a different way. So over the years, I measured hundreds and hundreds of casts of natural teeth. And so the first thing I did is I would measure from the center of the incisive papilla on the lower part of your screen right there out to the labial incisal 1/3 of the upper anterior teeth. Now, that was an easy one to do. And I can tell you, over the years, the average measurement we get is 10. Then I found out that the incisive papilla is actually a constant landmark in the edentulous maxilla, but it's only constant in the horizontal plane. From a vertical plane, we have to find a different way, because the more bone loss, the further down the incisal edge will be from the edentulous incisive papilla. And so at first, what I used to do is I would just tell people that what we're going to do is we're going to put that incisal edge down 22 millimeters from the general height of the labial vestibule. Now, that wasn't a very specific measurement. Then I noticed after a few years that all my teeth would always be too long. And so then I changed that measurement to 20. So now we call it the 10-20 rule. Now, let me show you how we do this. First of all, we start with good preliminary impressions. And excuse me, a stone cast made from good preliminary impressions. We prefer to have the preliminary impressions a little overextended rather than underextended, because when we go to the mouth with our treatment denture, it's much easier to work out help the patient create the functional impression if we start a little bit overextended. So here's the cast of the maxillary arch. Now, the two constant landmarks in the edentulous maxilla is, number one, is the hamular notches. The hamular notches, if you didn't get any bubbles in your impression there, and if an oral surgeon didn't take the tuberosity out with the third molar, you run a straight edge from hamular notch to hamular notch, and it's going to be level with the horizon, you might say. And the other constant landmark is the incisive papilla. Now, the incisive papilla, like I said, is only constant in the horizontal plane. We have to do something else in the vertical plane. So, first of all, we are going to make the incisal edge of the tooth, and we'll come right over here. Now, I used to say 20 millimeters from the general height. Now, let me tell you where I've worked it down to. First of all, we're going to look up here on the top, and on each side there, you see the little red mark. That is what I'm calling the height of the canine fossa. Then we come down here, right there, I'm calling that the insertion of the labial frenum. And I split the difference from the height of the canine fossa, insertion of the labial frenum, halfway between those two, and we come down 20 millimeters from that. Over here, we come out 10 millimeters from the center of the incisive papilla. So, we make a base plate, and we make a wax rim. And this little paddle that you see on the lower here, that is it's from, I think you can get them from Swiss Dent. You get them from Ivoclar. They're easy to find. They're called rim formers. And this little rim former has a little lip on the back that takes advantage of the fact that the hamular notches are a constant landmark. And so you put the little lip on the hamular notches, and all you do is just rotate this rim former and just melt your base plate wax, your wax rim, down to meet the 20 millimeter requirements. So on this left image, you see this is an Alma gauge. They're available from lots of sources. And we take and put the little marker right down onto where the incisive papilla is represented inside the base plate. And we want to bring that base plate 10 millimeters out. And over, excuse me, I advanced where I didn't mean to. On this right-hand screen, there is my halfway mark between the canine fossa and the frenum insertion, and we're going to come down 20 millimeters from here. We mark a midline by just looking at the midline of the edentulous maxilla. Then we put two central incisors there. We put laterals, and build them all flat to the paddle, and then we put the cuspids in. Now, this lower image here has something that is quite interesting. You look at the two different sides, and they look like almost like two different molds of teeth. Because one of the biggest mistakes that we see dentists make, or technicians make, because you know technicians are doing most of the setup, is they will, that thing moves, excuse me, I'm sorry, you'll have to put it out, the darn thing moves when I'm trying not to do that. Well, I'm sorry. Is this going to mess you up? I won't try to keep my hands off that computer because it makes it go when I don't want it to go. So I'm just going to put my mouse over here. So when you look at upper front teeth, you know, you've heard about the golden proportion. It's 1.63 to 6.3. And so the lateral is golden to the central, which means that the central is like 1.6 and the lateral is 0.6. Now, the cuspid is supposed to be golden to the lateral, and that should be, the cuspid should look 0.6 and the lateral should look 1.6. But when they take and hike a cuspid out like this, it changes the whole complexion of the case. So that's something you really have to watch out about. So then the last requirement is that when we place these 6 anterior teeth, we want to make sure we reproduce the patient's arch form. The arch form is either, ovoid, square, or tapering arch forms. And so that you want to try to match the arch form that the patient presents with. On the lower, we make a base plate. That base plate looks a little messy, but one of the things we do with the lower base plate is we reline that base plate with some old rubber polyester rubber impression material, and the reason we do that is because it's got that old rubber impression material they used to use has the best adhesive in the world, and the more stable we can make the lower base plate, the easier it is to do all the things, especially getting good jaw relations. Now you notice that this base plate is probably made a little short of that retromolar pad. And most of the time we make that lower base plate short of that retromolar pad. One time I worked for about an hour and a half trying to get a jaw relation on a denture patient, and I realized that the reason I was having trouble is because the heels of the base plates were hitting. Now, we don't use a wax rim on the lower base plate. We actually use a little piece of white wax, and we call it the speaking wax. We put this wax up about 15 millimeters high from the labial vestibule, and I'll show you in just a few minutes how we use that. So we go to the mouth, and I can tell you, using that 10-20 rule to set the teeth, about 60% of the time we generally don't even have to move them. One of the biggest problems we'll have a cant in the incisal plane, and the other problem we have will be the midline problem, because the midline of the face and the midline of the edentulous upper arch is not in the same place. So we put that in, we look at it, it looks pretty good, and I give the patient a mirror, and I'll say, now this is just my first try, but I think it looks pretty good. What do you think? Oh, it looks pretty good. Then we go right ahead, take our face bow, get our upper cast into the articulator. Now, a face bow is imperative. A denture maker not using a face bow is going to get in trouble, because all denture jaw relations, if they are accurate, they're all taken at an open vertical dimension. So you want the case mounted in a semi-adjustable articulator to match the opening and closing the same way in the patient's mouth. So then, here's another one. We did the 10-20, we go to the mouth, we don't even touch it. This patient looked and she said, well, I would like my front teeth a little squarer. And you notice in the lower screen, you see the rounded edges, and in the try-in up there, they look square. In other words, she wanted the teeth to look a little bit more worn. And so it works every time. Now, isn't that a horrible piece that this poor boy is wearing? It doesn't look really as bad as it should, but here is He's 20 millimeters down. In his case, he looks like he's 10.5 out, and you can see the difference. We made a different person out of him just from the aesthetics.
This is my good buddy Patricia. And Patricia works for a dentist part-time, just to give her something to do. And this dentist in town is a very nice young man, and he referred Pat over to see if we could do something for her teeth. So what we did last time, we took preliminary impressions, I took a facial measurement, and I selected a tooth that I thought was appropriate for Pat, and we used a 1020 to set her up front teeth in that. Now, it took years for me to work all this thing out so that I knew that they work. And let me show you something. Oh, we take the grin out of this, honey. That don't look so good, does it? Good. I told Pat from the very beginning she's going to need something a little bit younger. All right, Pat, take a look at that, honey.
Oh, unbelievable.
You all caved in up there?
Oh, my word.
We've got to work on that lower lip. Got that upper lip out there.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've got to make sure we get this back. She's still got her old dentures down there. When we do this first try, and if we take that lower out, and she doesn't get a sense. Now, you like that pretty well?
Oh, yeah. That looks unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Okay. Now, so the next.
Now, everybody is not as enthusiastic as Pat, but you see, we got the patient on our side now. The patient feels so much better about her denture, and that's what it's all about, keeping a positive feeling with that patient. Now, I'll stop right now because I just now thought of something that I think is kind of important. We all make mistakes and we learn from our mistakes. And in the past, I have been so enthusiastic about our technique. And that doesn't mean, our technique is generally, it works out great. And one thing that I probably should have said back when I was talking about predictability, when I talked about predictability of the denture, now that does not mean in any way for me to say that every denture that we do for a patient is successful. It's predictable. We know before we go to that final denture whether we have a successful case or not. My mentor, Dr. Earl Pound, told me many times, he said, Jack, if you can't stand failure, you probably ought not to do dentures because there's no way that you're going to satisfy every denture patient that comes in your office. And so the predictability thing is that we know before we're going to, before we finish. And one of the big problems that I've made in the past is I've been so enthusiastic, and I think that I'm going to be able to make this patient so happy with these functional impressions and all this, that I get so enthusiastic, I get the patient's hopes up too much. And the one thing that I have to really watch myself is, it's far better with these denture patients to paint a dismal picture. Now, I know that they might say, well, that makes the patient feel bad. But I think in the long run, we're better off to paint a little bit dismal picture. And so then when things do turn out absolutely incredibly better than anything they've had before, which is the way it works most of the time, then the patient is absolutely happy as they can be. Now we have the upper 6 anterior teeth. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use this speaking wax to determine the position of these lower anterior teeth. Now, once we determine the position of these lower anterior teeth using phonetics, any dentulous mandible is like a tripod that lost its third leg. Once we determine where the lower incisors need to go, why, it should be a piece of cake now, because we now have put the third leg back on the tripod, and now all we got to do is feed the back teeth in, and we should be ready to go. Now, we call this little white piece of wax there speaking wax because we're going to use phonetics to determine where to put those lower two front teeth. That will determine the class of occlusion. That will also determine the vertical dimension. Now, in phonetics, the S position is the closest that the upper and lower teeth come to touching when you speak. When you enunciate the S sounds, that's the closest that the upper and lower teeth will come to one another during phonetics. Now, the vertical dimension must not interfere with normal muscle function. So if you built the vertical dimension and you made the lower incisors so high that they pounded together and bumped together and clicked together as the patient talked, not only would it not be very nice for the patient, but it'll make the upper denture loose and fall down. Now, there are a lot of ways to determine vertical dimension of occlusion. The literature tells us that there is no scientific way. So there's all kinds of things. One of the things that we do is have the patient, once we get the upper and lower anterior teeth in there, see if the patient can take 3 of their fingers and open wide enough. If they can't open wide enough to get 3 of their fingers in there, the teeth may be too long. Another thing we do is, you know how a woman puts on lipstick? She puts a lipstick on her upper lip, and then she rolls her lips over and rubs the lipstick off of her upper lip onto her lower lip. Now, if they can't do that, with the teeth may be too prominent. Now, a balanced occlusion and central duration, the anterior tooth position, vertical dimension, and phonetics have been determined once we get those 2 lower front teeth there. Now, in speech patterns, here's kind of what we're going to see. The S sound is a subtle whistle. It's caused by forcing air between 2 hard surfaces, like S. Now, about 70% of the general population will have what we call a typical S position. These people are almost always class 1 angles jaw relation, and they make their S sounds by forcing the air between the incisal edges of the upper and lower anterior teeth. About 25% of the population will have an atypical S position, and these people will make their S sound by forcing the air between the lower incisal edge and the upper lingual concavity. And these are your class 2 individual. 5% of the population are going to have abnormal S's. These are our lispers and tongue thrusters. And we call them lispers because they are trying to make a S sound with the tip of their tongue, which is not hard. In fact, they can't make a little subtle whistle at all by doing that. Now, here is Brandy. A little lady was working in the office at one time, and watch her speech pattern. She is a class 1. She is a typical S position, and watch her speech pattern. And then at the end of the tape, she closes on her back teeth, and you will see she closes into a class 1 angle jaw relation.
If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, your is the earth and everything that it is in, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Okay, now close your teeth back again. Okay, now Dr. Pound said that if this little lady should lose her lower teeth, if we put the little piece of speaking wax there and adjusted it till it cleared and it was in anatomic harmony, we would reestablish the same vertical dimension and tooth position that Brandy had in her natural teeth. Now, I can tell you that you take people that have been a denturist for many, many years, there can be a lot of adaptations. But this is our first line of treatment when we're determining vertical dimension. Most of the time it works. Sometimes we only use it as a partial guide. We use other things like how the patient opening and putting their 3 fingers and things like that, and just looking at the lateral view of the face and determining what looks normal. So now this is Vicky. Now she's a complete denture patient, and this is the day that we put her dentures in. Now this is Vicky speaking, and watch the position of her. She's a class 1 occlusion. She closes her back teeth together. She's in a class 1.
If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Okay, now count from 60 to 70, rapidly.
60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70.
All right. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay, read the poem again for a minute.
If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. But I guess everybody is.
What were you skeptical about?
Well, I don't know if you didn't, I don't know. I don't know what I was skeptical about. I was apprehensive and skeptical.
So this next little video shows adjusting the wax to determine the S position. Now, as you watch this patient is the one that we used on some of the Restorative Academy videos. And when we first put the speaking wax in, it's way too long and it's way too labial. Then the next time, the speaking, it's pretty much facially lingual, but it's still bumping. The third time, it looks pretty good, but I had a lateral that was depressed and it was bumping there. And the fourth time, it's perfect. Now you got to watch these videos because these we don't hold the patient's mouth apart. We just have to watch where the incisal edge. Now, this video that we did on this thing is once we get the speaking wax, which represents where the lower incisors are going to go, we take a wax bite. Our first bite is a wax bite, just to get it into the articulator. And I thought the patient was a class 1 patient. And I fiddled around with her for just a few minutes, and her mandible went back into a class 2. And if you'll see on the video, I myself am surprised. Now, what you see is what you get, because I'm almost ashamed to admit this. I really don't know how to alter, to edit these videos. Now, and I've got some lovely videos at home that I'd love to use in my butt. I got some cussing in them, and I don't know how to edit the cussing out.
That looks pretty good. Now we've got to determine the vertical dimension by the use of the speaking wax. And so we have a little piece of wax now, and we built the wax up just arbitrarily, about 17 or 18. Actually, for the demonstration, that's a little long. That's about 20 millimeters up. So let's show, that's going to be too long. Let's show how the phonetics dictate where those lower teeth are going to go. You can tell the lower teeth are too high just from that. Now, Eloise, I want you to count from 1 to 10 very rapidly for me.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
First of all, it's hitting, and it's out just a little bit too much. So if we built her lower incisors at that point, the teeth would click together. So we simply take and shorten this thing. Bring the incisal edges down a couple of millimeters. And actually I'm going to pull them back just a hair. Now let's see how we did this time. Now we got them
shorter, look a little bit better there. Now count from 1 to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
It's just about the right, as far as being anterior, posterior, it's just about right. I assume that Eloise is a class 1 jaw relation. And do it again. You notice when she talks, they're still hitting a little bit.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
See, when she gets to the
9,
6.
10.
So let's shorten it a little bit more. Okay, it looks better down there. Okay, Eloise, 1 to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Now 60 to 70, real quick.
61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67.
Okay, it's hitting a little bit where we got this lateral depressed a little. It's hitting a little on the side there. But I think we're there. Okay, Eloise, this time let's go from 60 to 70.
60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70.
It's missing. That's the vertical dimension. Now, retract your jaw. Okay, she closes back just a little bit open, and just go back now. Close straight up. You notice she retrudes 4 or 5 millimeters. Actually, a little class 2-ish. See how she closes back to centric. Now open, Eloise. Now count from 1 to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
See how she comes forward to make her S sounds. Now, in the process of developing the trial denture, the next thing we'll do is take a wax bite, put this up into the articulator with the face bow, and go ahead and do the setup. Then the second bite will be, at setup time, the second bite will be a central bearing point.
Okay, so you saw Eloise and using phonetics. There at the end, when I had the speaking wax clearing very nicely as she spoke, and understand the S sounds. But then when I started to kind of manipulate her mandible to see if I could seat her condyles, she didn't want to go to centric, but then she went to centric, and I was surprised. I thought she was a class 1, and she really turned out to be a slightly more class 2-ish than class 1. So, kind of going back over the thing again, here's our 6 upper anterior teeth. Patient likes it. We make sure those 6 anterior teeth are there okay. We take a face bow, we put the upper denture in, and the first bite that we're going to take is going to be a wax bite. That's the only time we do a wax bite. That's just to get the case into the articulator and in a pretty close position. There's all kinds of wax that you can use. The alu wax probably is the best wax that we use for these wax bites. But wax bites is never the final jaw relation that we use. Now, so let's prepare for the first try-in. Before we're going to process the treatment denture. You understand now, the upper anterior teeth are in there. We have the upper cast in the articulator of the face bow. We know that the patient is given a provisional okay to the aesthetics of the case. We know that we got the vertical dimension right. We think we're fairly close to centric. Now, it's in the articulator. Now, first of all, something else that I believe that a lot of people don't believe is I think that the only border movement of the mandible that we have to be concerned about in complete dentures is straight protrusive. This thing that people talk about, they set the teeth up so that they have group function on the working side and group function on the balancing side. That's a myth. It can't be done. But it's okay to say you can do that, but even if you could do it, the denture patients won't use it. Now, not all denture patients even need to have the balance in straight protrusion. And what we're talking about is when we get these lower front teeth, the rest of the lower anterior teeth in there, when that articulator goes to straight protrusion, we're going to have almost like group function because some denture patients learn to bite on their front teeth. Some denture patients never learn to bite on their front teeth, and this is explained to patients before we ever start. All these 45 years since I met Dr. Pound, I've learned a lot of things, and most of the things that I've learned the hard way by having a dissatisfied patient for me. So we tell patients a lot of things. Every patient knows an Uncle Charlie that can eat anything. He's got dentures, and he can eat anything that don't eat him first. And so they think that all dentures are supposed to work like that. If they can't bite on their dentures, then Uncle Charlie bites on his dentures, but I can't bite on them. All this is explained and to the patient ahead of time that you may or may not learn to bite on your front teeth. Denture patients that learn to bite on their front teeth control the back half of their dentures with the middle of their tongue. So we set the condyle inclinations to an arbitrary 20-degree inclination, and the incisal guide table is set. And the only border move we worried about is straight protrusion. It's set so that we get the lower anterior teeth barely kiss one another when they go over. So then we set the rest of the lower incisors in place. And as we set the lower incisors in place, we set each one of them and run that articulator into straight protrusion to make sure we have group function. Now, the next thing is the occlusal plane. Then there's a lot of ways. You can say the occlusal plane is from a line drawn from the incisal edges of the upper anterior teeth back to halfway up the retromolar pad, 3/4 up the retromolar pad, 2/3 up I've heard all kinds of things. We normally just set our occlusal plane to our posterior occlusal plane parallel to Camper's line. Camper's line is a line that runs from right underneath the ale of the nose, right to the middle of the little tragus of the ear. Now, we got to worry about the occlusal plane in two directions. Camper's line is only the superior inferior position of the posterior plane. The buccolingual position of the posterior plane is what Dr. Pound used to call the lingual control line. So you can see on the upper left picture there the ruler going to the alar of the nose, to the middle of the tragus of the ear, and the Fox plane showing that the posterior occlusion is set up parallel to that. Now the lower photograph shows a natural case. The lingual control line is this. If you run a straight edge from the mesial of the cuspid to the lingual aspect of the retromolar pad, you will find in a normal occlusion that no part of any posterior tooth will come closer to the tongue than that line. Mesial of the cuspid to the lingual aspect of the retromolar pad. The other line that you see down there is the mesial of the cuspid to the buccal of the retromolar pad, and you will find that no portion of the lower posterior tooth will fall totally outside to the buccal of that line. And so Dr. Pound always called that the lingual control line. And it just always seems to work. Now, here is a case, another case of a natural occlusion, and it always works. If you'll run the lingual to the mesial contact of the cuspid to the lingual aspect of the retromolar pad, then that is nature's way of developing the neutral zone. So that's my 22nd lecture on the neutral zone. We just used the lingual control line. We've been doing it like that for over 40 years. We've never had any problems with that. Now, the type of occlusion that we're going to use lingualized occlusion. Now, lingualized occlusion, there's a lot of different denture occlusions. And when I was in school, I was taught a flat plane occlusion. I was also taught a anathologic occlusion, where you try to mimic natural occlusion with dentures. And that's very, very difficult to do. I hear a lot of clinicians talk about how they can equilibrate a dentition to tripodized occlusion. Now, nature will make our natural teeth come into place, and they generally have nice tripodized occlusion. But I don't think most dentists are good as nature. So in clinical work, when we equilibrate, we're lucky to get the cusps into a fossa and keep them off of inclined planes. So if you try to set a denture occlusion up into a anathologic occlusion with a lower buccal cusp and upper central fossas and upper lingual cusp and lower central fossas, you're never going to get it totally balanced. Lingualized occlusion is a very simple occlusion. It's an upper sharp cusp that operates in a lower shallow fossa. It almost works like a mortar and pestle. And there has been some research, and I'm sorry I can't quote the research, I could look it up if it needed to be, where they've made patients with flat plane occlusion, anathologic occlusion, what they called another type of occlusion, I can't come up with the name of it, and lingualized occlusion, and they made patients different dentures with it. And I think the results always show the patient preferred the lingualized occlusion. It's very efficient. And once you get that mandible into center relation, it's really good to get all these cusps equal in their contact. Now, one more thing about occlusion, and that is, let me talk about when do we use a cross bite. Now, if you look on the upper left screen, the upper left image there is a tooth that's in the perfect position because nature put that tooth there. Now, we come in here and we put an upper denture tooth and we put that denture tooth in lingualized occlusion. I want you to notice something. That whole tooth is out in the buccal vestibule. Maxillary posterior teeth. One of the things that you want to see is you want to see the lingual cusp of the upper posterior maxillary teeth being fairly close to the crest of the ridge. When a patient loses a maxillary molar, the bone that goes away first is the bone that houses the two buccal cusps. The bone that stays mainly is the bone that houses the big lingual cusp. So when we put a tooth in lingualized occlusion like this center image here, and that tooth is way out to the buccal vestibule, what we do is just take it and turn it around, put the upper buccal cusp in the lower central fossa, and now we have a crossbite. Now, most class 3s, if you notice this setup is an edge-to-edge class 3, and most class 3s will end up being in crossbite. And this is just a cross-section of the denture teeth in crossbite. Now, here's a case that I did many, many years ago, and if you look at the upper left image, I'm not doing too bad getting these bicuspids into lingualized occlusion. However, if you look at my lingual control line on the lower left screen, I'm actually violating the lingual control line with my bicuspids. Then when I get to the molars, there's no way. The only way I can not violate the lingual control line and get that upper molar into lingualized occlusion, look where it is. That's not right. So the whole posterior segment is in crossbite. Notice the man is a edge-to-edge class 3 occlusion. So look at these. Now these are all final wax-ups ready to go into the patient's training denture. The upper left, you see a class 2 setup, and notice about class 2s. The first functioning tooth is the upper second bicuspid functioning in the lower fossa of the lower first bicuspid. Now, sometimes we can alter this sometimes. Sometimes what I'll do, if we use the occlusion on this particular case like that, we would just grind the lingual cusp off of this first bicuspid and make a cuspid out of it. I could use smaller lower anterior teeth and make the upper first the first functioning tooth. Sometimes I'll leave one lower incisor out so I can put the first bicuspid to work. Then on the upper right screen is a edge-to-edge class 3. And the first functioning teeth on this edge-to-edge class 3 is an upper cuspid functioning in a lower bicuspid. And then the lower image is the class 1. I've often said there's more orthodontics done in a denture lab than any place else in the world, because you never see anything except dentures set to all class 1 occlusions. Now, at this point, we'll achieve any special aesthetics for the patient. And then we put the upper posterior teeth in. We put the lingual cusp hanging down just a little bit. We wax up our chewing block on the lower posterior, as you can see in this lower image.